It is 11 p.m. in Las Vegas, 9 a.m. in Damascus, and 4 on a Wednesday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Gon-young. This is ARIRANG, Korea's only global network. Now, Korea's finance ministry says the domestic economic recovery is gathering momentum despite lingering global economic uncertainties, which are casting a cloud over what would otherwise represent an optimistic outlook. In its monthly Green Book report released Wednesday, the ministry said major economic indicators like production and investment improved last October and November compared to the third quarter of last year. It also cited stabilizing prices and expanding employment. However, the report also pointed to the weak Japanese yen and the U.S. Federal Reserve's bond buying stimulus tapering as major uncertainties that could hurt the nation's growth rate in the longer run. Korea saw a boom in the medical tourism industry last year, with the country's health tourism surplus topping $100 million for the first time. The Bank of Korea said Wednesday that the country's income from medical tourism was $187 million in the first 11 months of last year, growing more than 35% from the same period in 2012. Now, during the same period, however, local residents' overseas spending on medical tourism decreased by more than 11%. Korea saw its first surplus in the medical tourism industry back in 2011. Korean tech giants Samsung and LG are facing competition from Japanese and Chinese companies in an increasingly heated battle for the ultra-high-definition TV market. Now, at the Consumer Electronics Show now running in Las Vegas, Samsung and LG both rolled out their lineups of curved UHD TVs, as Sony and other Japanese companies showcased UHD TV lines of their own. Now, Chinese budget TV maker TCL unveiled a line of UHD TVs that are less than half the price of Samsung and LG's models, which are priced between $30,000 and $70,000 US. Well, market analysts expect UHD TV sales of around 12 million units for this year. We turn to business today. First, look at the local bourse. Now, Korean shares ended flat this Wednesday after a tug-of-war between offshore investors who had the appetite to buy stocks on positive U.S. trade data and local institutions selling them for profits. At the closing bell, the benchmark Kospi closed nearly flat at 1959, while the tech-heavy Kosdaq finished nearly about 1% higher. On the foreign exchange counter, the Korean currency closed stronger against the greenback at roughly 1,065 won. Well, gold is being shunned after its miserable 2013 performance, but some analysts are starting to see glimmers of a recovery in the new year. Well, it's a bold call for a nearly universally hated asset. Now, gold lost about 28% last year, its worst decline in more than 3 decades. So, what went wrong for the precious metal in 2013, and will gold be 2014's comeback hit? For an in-depth look into this issue, we're joined live in the studio by Dr. Kim Byung-ju, head of KLP Consulting and our regular commentator on this program. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
Now, gold price, some say a 43% drop in 2.5 years. Now, others have been saying that a 30% decrease or drop in a year and a half.
Right.
What do we see in the long-term trend?
Well, basically, a lot of people are saying this is the ending of a 12-year continuous rise of the gold price. It began around like 2001 after the 9/11 crisis. So overall, as the world faced the great difficulties and uncertainties, the price began rising. And let's bring up the illustration here that could add further details up here. Yeah. And after that, what happened was the 2008 financial crisis followed. So the prices went up further even. And so as you can see here, it's like a 12-year rise overall. But since then, after its peak, actually, the 1700 that you see right there is a recent peak, but actually at the previous one, several months before then, it reached almost up to $1,900 per ounce. And then since then, depending on how you measure it, basically what we're looking at is like a 1/3 of its price being wiped out basically last year. And that's a big shock for those people who believed in the value of gold. But the thing is, we've seen this before. During 1980 to 82, we saw 2/3 of its price being wiped out from like close to $850 per ounce down to like 300. So this is not totally new, but we are then again seeing this ending of this long period of rise.
Now, about the explanation that the U.S. quantitative easing so far has caused the gold prices to plunge, isn't that counterintuitive? Because in theory, if there is more money in the market, the gold prices would go up.
Yeah, very sound understanding of economics 101 right there. The thing is, however, when money supply increases, if the inflation increases, which is usually the case, by the way, money supplies increases, that will drive the inflation up, and when inflation increases, actually the popularity for gold will increase. What happened here this time in our case is inflation didn't happen despite the money supply increase because of the QE. And so that was the critical link here. So because the worldwide, we didn't see the inflation, rather a lot of people have been talking about possible global deflation. We didn't get to see the rise of the gold, rather fall of it we got to saw. And tapering, ever since the tapering announcement was made, a lot of people are expecting now strengthening of dollar. Of course, that has little to do with the value of won. Value of won will continue to increase further, and in comparison with won, probably the value of dollar will decrease. But a lot of people, for now, like dollar independently, are talking about strengthening of the dollar, and that actually pushes the value of gold further down. And also last year, of course, the stock market in the United States was doing so well, so all the money went into stock market rather than the gold. That was another one. And overall, of course, this was the period where all these uncertainties in the Middle East, like Iraq and Afghanistan, is being managed and all that. So no further drive to actually push the gold up. Those were the reasons.
Now, what about what's happening in China and India? You know, they are the world's biggest buyers of gold. And, are we seeing change of hearts there? And is that really a price furthering the plunge of the gold prices?
In fact, that's a very good point. What has been happening in India and China actually have been driving the gold price further down. In India, because of their current account deficit problems, the government has been discouraging the import of gold, and we saw last year like a 40% reduction of gold import into India. That played a big part as the world's largest gold market. And China, this is an interesting story, but Xi Jinping, ever since he announced this drive for clean up the corruption and all that, demand for gold went down. And so that's playing a big time role again. So those, country-specific reasons are driving the price down as well.
It's a very interesting link there. Now, last year, Bank of Korea bought a lot of gold. We know that in an attempt to diversify their foreign reserves holdings. Now, does that mean that Bank of Korea is in a big trouble right now?
Actually, critics of Bank of Korea are now actually finding a cause to criticize about on that, because Bank of Korea, I think it was back in 2011, July, when the central bank began buying gold for the first time in 30 years, indeed. And since then, Bank of Korea bought like 16 or 17, sometimes 20 tons of gold at like 4 or 5 different times. So altogether, Korea's central bank's reserve of gold has increased vastly. And a lot of critics of the central bank who are eager to find reasons to complain about the bank's operation are saying we're losing money because the gold price is going down. However, I don't think we are really like a biggest casualty here. One example is, can you guess which actually central bank in the world holds the largest amount of gold? It is Switzerland. And Switzerland, Swiss National Bank has lost a lot of money last year because of that. And they're talking about, in terms of Korean won terms, like 10 trillion won loss was recorded last year. And because of that, for the first time in history, Swiss National Bank could not pay out dividends to different shareholders who are local governments. So there were big complaints right there. So, if you feel bad about what the Bank of Korea has done, just look at Switzerland and you will feel better.
Well, we'll take comfort from the Swiss example. Now, for the outlook, do we see continuous decline of the prices of the gold price this year, or will we see the precious metal shine again?
Right. If we have a right answer to this question, we can make a lot of money here.
Correct.
According to my observation, looks like a majority seems to be pessimists, saying that probably it will not rebound big time. And some of the strongest pessimists are saying actually the price currently, which stands at around like 1,200, 1,300 per ounce of gold, will go down all the way to $1,000 per ounce, perhaps sometime this year, and that will be the bottom. And after that, there will be long extension of this, like a lukewarm movement staying right at this, around that, value region. That's overview. That's the outlook for them. That they're saying that because we should not expect anything like oil shock during the 70s, which shot the gold price up, or like 9/11 crisis and Afghanistan crisis that shot gold price up again after 2000. And so as long as we don't expect that, you should not expect a dramatic rise of the gold. But there's a small minority optimists who are saying, well, then again, overall, we have to acknowledge the fact that, supply of dollar has been increased to the market. Even though we don't see the inflation right at this point, we will eventually see one. And in that case, gold price will rise. So therefore, the view is divided.
Right. So, but the majority is saying that just as long as we don't see a big crisis coming up, the gold prices will not surge.
Right.
To
gold is not
new
going
highs.
to be something that's hot. That's
All
their
right.
view.
I will not rush myself to buy gold now.
Don't count on it, though.
All right, Dr. Kim Byung-ji, thank you so much for today. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay.
With rapid changes in the global economy, up-to-date business and financial news has never been more essential. See what's making markets tick around the globe. We speak to the experts and cover the biggest financial stories.
North Korea provocation.
Quite good. We received a lot of positive feedback, especially from local.
Korea has expressed to the U.S. that historical issues stand in the way of improved ties in Northeast Asia. Comments seemingly directed towards Japan following Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's recent visit to a war shrine that honors several Class A war criminals. Now, Seoul and Washington also agreed to a word toward easing tensions in the region and reiterated their united front against North Korea's nuclear threats. ARIRANG News Yoo reports.
Korea has delivered its message to the United States that history disputes remain a stumbling block to improving relations in Northeast Asia. Following an hour-long meeting with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry in Washington Tuesday, Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se said the current situation in the region calls for sincere actions, adding that the two agreed on the need to alleviate tensions.
Secretary Kerry and I also recognize the growing uncertainty pervading Northeast Asia in recent times. In particular, I pointed out that historical issues stand in the way of reconciliation and cooperation in this region.
While neither Yoon nor Kerry directly mentioned Japan by name, the comments are almost certainly aimed at Tokyo, as they come just weeks after Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's visit to the Yasukuni Shrine escalated tensions with Korea and China. The shrine honors Japan's war dead, including several Class A war criminals. The two officials also agreed to urge Pyongyang to get rid of its nuclear program.
We call on the North Korea to denuclearize. We will not accept North Korea as a nuclear state, nor as a nuclear-armed state, and nor will the international community abide by that.
Emphasizing the two countries stand united, Kerry added the United States is fully committed to the defense of South Korea and said it will continue to modernize its military capabilities in preparation against any threat. Yoo-An, ARIRANG News.
The United States said Tuesday that it will send 800 additional soldiers as well as tanks and other armed vehicles to Korea to rebalance its forces across the Asia-Pacific. The troops' M1A2 tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles from the 1st U.S. Cavalry Division will start a 9-month deployment on February 1st, just south of the demilitarized zone separating the two Koreas. Army Colonel Steve Warren said that the troop increase has long been planned and is part of the U.S.'s rebalance of its military power in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, the U.S. already has roughly 28,000 troops stationed in Korea. The announcement came after talks between Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se and Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel at the Pentagon. Korea and the U.S. have reportedly agreed to adopt a document dealing with nuclear exports and management of spent nuclear fuel. The document, separate from the two-side civilian nuclear energy accord that is to be revised by March 2016, will ease the process for Korea to obtain nuclear power plant parts from the U.S. to be exported elsewhere and encourage cooperation in spent fuel reprocessing technologies. Now, Seoul has been pushing Washington to allow it to enrich its own uranium and reprocess spent nuclear fuel to meet its growing energy needs, but the U.S. remains reluctant to agree due to proliferation concerns. After wrapping up their 9th round of negotiations in Korea's central city of Daejeon on Wednesday, the two sides will resume talks in April. And on to a move that is sure to further escalate tensions in Northeast Asia. Japan's ruling party has set constitutional reform and continued visit to the Yasukuni Shrine as key goals for the coming year. Oh Jin-ju has the details.
Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party has unveiled its key goals for the coming year: reform the constitution and continue with visits to the controversial Yasukuni War Shrine. During a general meeting on Tuesday, the party decided to, quote, make practical constitutional reforms without damaging the original purpose of the country's pacifist constitution. The party also vowed not to wage war and agreed to uphold the tradition of visiting the Yasukuni Shrine, which honors 2.5 million Japanese war dead, including 14 Class A war criminals. With regard to education, the party promised to ensure that students will not be taught a pessimistic concept of history by putting in place measures for making and adopting textbooks. Those plans, however, are expected to face a strong backlash from Korea and China. The biggest concern being brought up in both countries is that Japan is trying to become a country that is allowed to engage in war by amending its pacifist constitution. The current constitution, adopted after the nation's defeat in World War II, bans the country from using military force.
Should the Japanese leader avoid facing Japan's history of militaristic invasion and not take sincere steps toward reflecting on its past wrongdoing, the country will be led down a wrongful and dangerous path.
The decision to continue visits to the war shrine is also expected to draw criticism not only from Seoul and Beijing, but many countries around the world, just as it did after Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's latest visit there. In line with its goals for the coming year, the Abe administration has also officially launched a secretariat of the National Security Council that will serve as the control tower for the government's security policies. Oh Jin-ju, ARIRANG News.
Now, a creative talent. President Park Geun-hye has called for an educational revolution to foster creativity in the nation's young people. Speaking at a New Year's ceremony with members of the education sector, the president said that classrooms should be a place where students develop their dreams and talents, not one in which a premium is placed on competition and college admission. President Park vows to change the nation's educational paradigm one step at a time so that students are free to be creative and develop both their intellects and personalities. In a move seen as an important step toward dismantling Syria's chemical weapons stockpile, the first batch of chemical weapons materials was loaded onto a ship and taken out of that country on Tuesday. The operation is the first step in a UN-led deal to rid the country of its deadly chemical arsenal. Our Sun Jung-in has this report.
Raw materials for poison gas were loaded Tuesday onto a Danish cargo ship at Syria's port of Latakia in what is being seen as a major milestone in a plan to rid the country of its chemical arms by the middle of this year. The UN and the International Chemical Weapons Watchdog responsible for ensuring the weapons destruction said the Danish ship is on course for a meeting with the U.S. Navy vessel that will then take the cargo out to international waters where it will be destroyed. The chemicals were scheduled to be removed from Syria by December 31st, but a worsening domestic conflict, bad weather, and other factors delayed the operation by a week. Syria agreed to abandon its chemical weapons by June of this year under a deal brokered by the U.S. and Russia. The deal came about in response to a chemical weapons attack on a Damascus suburb last August that left at least 1,400 civilians dead. Since then, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's forces have been under international pressure over allegations that he used sarin nerve gas in the attack. The weapons removal operation is taking place against the backdrop of a widening civil war and escalating infight between rebel factions. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the war, now in its third year, has killed more than 130,000 people. 손정인, 아리랑 뉴스.
Over in the United States, the worst cold spell in about 2 decades is gripping much of that nation. Record-shattering low temperatures have grounded flights and halted trains, and at least 20 deaths have been blamed for the weather since last week. Connie Lee has more.
A blast of Arctic air has settled over much of the eastern United States. In upstate New York, the cold is visible in the frozen roads and buildings covered in snow. Washington, D.C. is also suffering from the abnormally low temperatures.
It's not good. This is like the coldest we've had it in years, and it's sad.
On Tuesday, the National Weather Service said that temperatures from the Midwest to the Southeast were expected to be 14 to 19 degrees lower than average for this time of year. Central Park in New York hit a record low of minus 16 degrees Celsius, and usually mild Atlanta, Georgia in the south reported its coldest temperature in 44 years at minus 14 degrees Celsius.
We're not used to it at all, so we're not prepared.
The deep freeze grounded nearly 2,000 U.S. flights on Tuesday and delayed more than 1,000 others, according to one airline activity website. And 3 Amtrak trains that were heading into Chicago came to a halt, leaving more than 500 passengers stranded overnight.
When we passed Princeton, he said we coming to a little delay. That delay lasted 12 and a half hours. There wasn't no delay.
Since last week, at least 20 weather-related deaths have been attributed to the cold. And outside of the U.S., Western Europe has also been battling some of its worst storms in 2 decades. Torrential rains and high winds have caused massive flooding and power outages this week. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
The smog-filled skies above China are a visible reminder of the heavy price the nation is paying for its rapid economic development. A recently released medical report suggests as many as 500,000 people are dying each year in China due to air pollution. Connie Kim has the details.
The smog-cloaked skylines of Chinese cities aren't just an eyesore, they're affecting the health of Chinese citizens. A report published in the Lancet Medical Journal says that air pollution in China is responsible for between 350,000 to 500,000 premature deaths every year. Former Chinese Health Minister Chen Zhu and the co-authors of the report used information from the World Bank and the World Health Organization that included real-time air monitoring data across cities. Recognizing the growing problem, the Chinese government has invested $280 billion to crack down on major polluters. The measures are expected to cut down premature deaths in the nation by up to 200,000 annually. But there is no easy fix. While industrial and coal plants, along with vehicles, are known to be the major polluters, Chen, the author of the study, said the multiple sources of pollution in China make it difficult to control. The smog belt in China had been mainly confined to the capital city of Beijing, but it has rapidly expanded to other cities like Shanghai and Nanjing. On Tuesday, the Chinese government issued its highest-level smog warning in the northern and central regions and advised people to avoid outdoor activities. It's a growing problem that doesn't just affect China. The Korean government issued fine dust warnings for the first time ever in December after it blew over across the West Sea, and additional warnings have come in recent weeks. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Well, it looks like we'll be having a cold weather here in Seoul as the Korean Meteorological Agency has now issued a cold wave advisory in the central region of this country. But here now is a look at the weather conditions in your neck of the woods. And that brings us to the end of this newscast, but stay tuned to ARIRANG. We have a lot more coming your way on Early Edition at 6.